What's good, everybody, and welcome back to another car review here on the driveway, where this week the boys and girls at Toyota have given us the keys to what is already widely known as one of their best-selling and one of their more fuel-efficient models. However, for 2020, they've turned the green notch up just a little bit more with the introduction of this, the 2020 Toyota Corolla Hybrid. Boys and girls, so time to get this thing rolling, and step number one involves giving the car some power, of course. Now, I'm sure many of you guys watching this already are probably looking at this new Corolla Hybrid saying, well, that looks like a very boring and somewhat uninteresting vehicle, and to a degree, I would actually agree with you guys, because the new Corolla Hybrid is only offered as the more basic LE trim. If you guys want some more sporty looks and a little bit more performance, but still getting somewhat decent fuel economy, the gas-powered Corolla is, of course, offered with things like an available manual transmission and much more sporty looks and features. But we're not going to discount all of those things just yet, because there is still plenty to talk about with this car. But as I said, step number one involves getting in and starting it up. So you have Toyota's newer key fob here. I love the design of these, especially with vehicle names imprinted on the back, and in this case you have the blue Toyota badge on it as well. It has the usual array of buttons: lock, unlock, trunk, panic, and the releasable key blade out of the bottom. And also, in typical Toyota fashion, you do have the touch sensors for locking and unlocking the vehicle. So unlock, just grab the handle as normal, and locking, just touch your finger on the ribbed portion on the front edge of either one of the door handles. Now, as you would expect with any vehicle equipped with keyless access, starting this car is an absolute snap. Again, just have the key anywhere in the vehicle, foot on the brake pedal, and in this case, hit this blue power button up here on the dashboard, and now, once you get around the fact that this new Corolla Hybrid is offered only as a more basic trim level, I will still say that I really do like the exterior design of both this and the new Corolla hatchback. Again, I first fell in love with the design several months ago when I tested the new Corolla hatch, but here for this four-door variant, again, the design remains just as youthful. Now, at a price tag just over $24,000 as shown here, again, it is a more basic trim, but you do get a lot of more modern features as standard equipment. Case in point are the headlights. For starters, I love the angular design. Again, I mentioned them as a selling point for me on the Corolla hatchback, but here on the Hybrid, it still remains the same. You got full LED headlights with the LED main beam, with the active high beam assist. That's part of the standard Toyota Safety Sense package. You also have the active LED daytime running lights and the LED turn signals up here in the front as well. As you move down towards the front, again, the grille is nice and large, and it is mainly open for the most part, except for the little separating piece here in the middle that protects the crash bar at the front of the vehicle. Apart from that, you do have all the typical sensors, again, for that TSSP system, for things such as the lane departure warning with active steering assist and the dynamic radar cruise control, just to name a few. And finally, last but not least, can't forget that all-important blue highlighted Toyota badge, letting you know that you are driving a Toyota hybrid vehicle. Now, of course, being on the lower end of the trim level spectrum, you're not going to get anything like big wheels and tires that would, of course, accentuate this car's more youthful design even more. Instead, the Corolla Hybrid features a set of 15-inch alloy wheels. Yes, there are actually alloys under these plasticky little hubcaps here, but these are wrapped in 195/65 series Yokohama tires, and for what they are, I actually think they don't look half bad. Underneath, you do have the typical setups, things like four-wheel disc brakes. They measure about 10 inches in size all the way around. Of course, they do have the typical regenerative braking for this hybrid variant, and of course, suspension-wise, you have the typical things. You have the McPherson strut suspension in the front and a multi-link suspension with a stabilizer bar in the back. Now, as one would probably guess with what we've talked about so far, there really is not too much to talk about even as we go down the side of this car. In fact, probably the most unique thing are the signature hybrid badges that Toyota has placed here on the front fenders, and there's also one located on the trunk. And as our boy Doug DeMuro would say, these are to let people know that you're not just driving any ordinary Toyota Corolla. But from there on, there's really not too much to speak of. You do have the cool little wind deflectors here, not just on the inside of the mirror, but also here on kind of the front mirror housing, if you can call it that. And I know there's some also on the taillights as well. Now that's to prevent like side drafts if you get a larger vehicle passing you from pushing you completely over into another lane. So it sort of absorbs the wind energy from passing vehicles, which is kind of a neat little fact. But again, from there on, really not too much to explain. You do have the body colored side view mirrors, as you would see here on pretty much every vehicle like this. But surprisingly, they don't have blind spot monitoring. I've seen some of the newer Corolla sedans, even that are less expensive than this one, that have BLIS either as an option or as a standard feature. But here on this hybrid model, again, over 24 grand, and you don't even get blind spot monitoring, which is just a little surprising to me. And last but not least, of course, up here on the top, we don't have any form of a sunroof, but really that's not so much a hindrance to me since I don't use the used sunroofs when they're on most cars anyway. Now, as you come towards the back of the Corolla four-door, again, it's really not as striking, I guess, or as youthful as the design is in the front, and certainly not as eye-catching as I would say on something like the new Corolla hatch. But you still do have at least a few things to talk about back here. You do have at least LED taillights, the turn signals and reversing lights. Those are both incandescent, but you do have LED main bulbs, to say the least. As I said before, you do have the signature hybrid badge like you find on the front fenders. No form of rear park assist, aside from the fact you do have the government mandated backup camera here just above your license plate. And of course, last but not least, finishing it all off, you do have the blue highlighted Toyota badge on the trunk lid here as well. Now, of course, one of the big benefits of compact cars like this nowadays are the fact that they've actually gotten a lot bigger. And of course, bigger car usually means a bit more trunk space in the back. And this Corolla certainly proves that point. So if you open the trunk latch here, of course, you do have a decent size entrance here. It's not exactly the tallest or the longest trunk that I've ever seen, but at 13.1 cubic feet of space, it still is quite practical. As you can see, we have a random box that we use here for some of our grocery shopping, and also my tripod, which is fully extended from that back corner all the way here to the front. So as you can see, it actually is quite roomy back here, but one of the benefits, even for this being a hybrid model, you do have 60/40 split fold seats there at the back, so you can fold those down and actually extend your cargo space, which is something you really couldn't do with a lot of hybrids back in the day, because they usually had a big annoying hump right there and no sort of foldable seat whatsoever. So if you're looking for a compact car that's practical and fuel efficient at the same time, it looks like this one here has got you covered. Now, while I will say a few praises about the exterior of this car in terms of its youthful and somewhat cheeky design, I don't know that I can say the exact same thing for the interior. Now, I can't exactly complain too much because, again, we are dealing with a more basic trim here, but starting out just at least with the seats on this car, they are full cloth seats. They're sort of that eco kind of cloth feeling material. You do have the sort of quilted pattern here, at least on the upper portions of the seats. They are manually adjustable for both the front occupants, but only the driver gets the benefit of the height adjustment. The passenger just has to deal with the reclining and distance control. So now, from the driver's perspective of the Corolla Hybrid, there are at least a couple of things that stick out to me right off the bat. The first of which has to do with comfort. Now, I'm not small, I'm 6'1", and the best part about all of this is that Toyota actually did raise the headliner just a little bit in order to allow taller folks to sit up front more comfortably. But on the other side of things, I did notice I had to pull the steering wheel out and scoot the seat back a good bit more to allow myself to find a more comfortable position. So if you are a little bit taller, you may have to adjust things a little bit more than usual to get yourself a little more comfortable in the front seat of this car. But the other thing is that even though this car is, again, around $24,000 as shown here, and it is a more baseline trim, Toyota didn't necessarily skimp on a lot of what a lot of modern people would call necessities. I don't necessarily call them necessities because a lot of these I could do without, but nevertheless, here on the usual 3-spoke steering wheel that a lot of Toyotas have these days, and again, it's vinyl, so no leather wrapped steering wheel or anything like that here. Again, you do have all the usual controls on the right here. The majority of your controls are for the dynamic radar cruise control. You have the distance sensor and the button for the lane departure warning system with active steering assist. Across the bottom, you have all of your hands-free radio controls, especially over here on the right. One of the buttons over here on the left is your voice recognition, along with your hands-free Bluetooth. And then you have a small little arrow pad over here on the left that controls the 7-inch thin film transistor display that is housed here with your tachometer, and of course all relevant information like your average fuel economy and so on. As you continue on to the left, you have a stock for your automatic LED daytime running lights and automatic headlights. As I said before, you have your intermittently timed wipers over here on the right. And finally, moving just to the left of all that, you do have the little latch here for the tilting and telescoping function here on the steering wheel. Again, you just pull it down and you can move the steering wheel about freely. Then you also have your fuel filler door, which, being the fact this car gets over 50 miles to the gallon, you shouldn't be using that all too often. And then of course you have a few of Toyota's ubiquitous blank switches. I'm assuming they have these here for other worldwide markets like European and Japanese markets. I'm sure they put other things there that we don't get here in the US, or perhaps not. But then you also have the button for the automatic high beams, as I mentioned earlier, along with your instrumentation dimming to complete the set. So now moving on to the middle section of our dashboard here, we of course are greeted by the 8-inch touchscreen infotainment display. Now we did look at this exact same display system in a lot of Toyota's other cars, so it is no surprise to see it here in this 2020 Corolla. Now a lot of people have said that it looks rather cheap and it looks like someone just stuck like a Google tablet up there on top of the dash, but there's one thing that I'm still adamant about. It is so great to have this here because it is almost right in my line of sight as I'm driving along. So I don't have to look down here. I don't have to look down somewhere in the center console and take my eyes off the road. It is right out of my peripheral vision. So everything is very clear and easy to see, and that makes it a much more beneficial system to use compared to something in some of Toyota's older vehicles. Now, as far as the functions themselves, this does have Toyota's newest Entune app suite. So if you go into the menu button here, of course, you can see how to access the applications themselves. The apps do include navigation. So you actually do have a map button down here in the lower left-hand corner, but unless you have the Entune system active via your phone, you cannot just simply push the map button and have the navigation system come up on its own. But the functions are all pretty simple. You have your audio, your phone, the app suite. This system is Apple CarPlay and Siri Eyes free compatible, but no Android Auto, which is a bit of a downer for me considering I am an Android user. But you also do have just your generic vehicle info and general setup as well. Now, also speaking of general, you guys know that one of my favorite things is testing the audio systems in these cars. And again, being a more basic Corolla and not something with like a Bose or premium brand stereo, your audio experience isn't necessarily going to be the greatest in this car, especially if you like a good bit of bass or something like that. But for what it is, it actually is still quite pleasant. So after you've gotten done banging your head around to some tunes, you're probably a little hot and sweaty. So let's talk about this car's climate zone system. And quite frankly, it's about as basic as it gets for a brand new car. You have all the control buttons down here. Aside from the two smaller knobs on the outside, you have your temperature with automatic setting over here on the left, fan speed over here on the right, with the appropriate displays featured right in the middle. Down below, you have some rather small little buttons, so it may take getting some used to, and you may end up hitting one that you don't intend to at some point in time. But over here on the left, you can turn the system off. You have your front and rear defrost next to that with your heated exterior mirrors. Your climate zone is one button here in the middle. You also have the eco mode for the heating and cooling in here. Again, this being a hybrid, so we know the air conditioning zaps a lot of energy from that, so this helps with that upper mile per gallon figure. Your air conditioning recycling, you can also cycle the air in from outside, as well as the AC function itself over here on the far right. As you move on from the climate zone, you actually have a nice little bit of storage down here in the back. As you can see, I've got the key to the car sitting in there right now, but it's big enough you could maybe put something like your smartphone or whatever back there. There's no wireless charging, so don't expect anything like that back here, but it is still a nice little storage compartment to speak of nonetheless. As you continue on from that, however, you get here to the three little buttons just here in front of the shifter. You do have a drive mode select in this car, which there are three different modes. There's normal, eco and power mode, aside from the EV mode, which is this button way over here on the right. So power mode, of course, kind of encourages the engine to act up a little bit more compared to the normal or eco modes, which encourages the car to cycle pretty consistently between the electric mode and the hybrid mode at the same time. And you also have your traction control button fixed here right in the middle. Now, as you continue a little further back from that, you get to the gear selector controlling the electronic CVT. Now, there are no manual modes with this CVT transmission, so it really is like driving an engine attached to a rubber band. You got all the typical modes: park, reverse, neutral, drive, and then you have a little B down here at the bottom. So if you pull the gear stick all the way to the back, which, as you can hear, once you do so, you have the automatic door locks as well. That actually is an engine brake. So if you are going downhill and you want to control your speed a little bit more, you can actually put the car in the engine braking mode, and it uses some of the engine's power to help slow you down, thus saving you time and money on the brakes. Now, you also do have a rear view camera, as you would expect. It's nice and wide. You do have a nice little widescreen view up here on the front. It does not come with trajectory, so as I'm turning the wheel here, as you can see, the lines are not moving. So again, just like a lot of the rest of the things on this car, it is a very basic backup camera system nonetheless. The funny thing is when you put this car in reverse, it emits the most ghostly, eerie sound that you will ever hear. Now you have two separate little cup holders back here, and they're pretty decently sized. I've got two regular sized bottles of water back here. One thing I would not advise is that although the front cup holder is plenty big enough to hold your large Coke from your local McDonald's in the front, it is not big enough to hold two of them. So if you have a secondary larger beverage here in the back, you're going to end up hitting it against the center console here. So you might have to wedge them together if you really want to get them in there, but I would really only advise putting one bigger drink here in the front and saving your smaller items for the rearward one. Speaking of the center console, however, the first thing I noticed is that it does actually slide forward, so you actually got a nice little armrest here to work with. But then actually once you open it up, you actually do have a decently sized little space down in there. I actually have a 120 watt or 12 volt outlet plugged in right now. This is actually housing my phone charger and my GoPro charging cord, which should actually just charge it surprisingly quick. But you also do have a 2.1 amp USB over here on the right as well. So you have plenty of room to charge all kinds of electronic devices in here. And again, space is not too limited, to say the least. So one of the areas that a lot of cars in this segment seem to fall on is when it comes to rear occupant space. Like I said, being up at the front of this car, it's not too bad, but here in the back, I do have a couple of things worth mentioning. The first of which is that, surprisingly, there actually is a little bit more headroom back here than I was expecting, despite the fact that, as you can probably see, the headliner is actually not indented back here like it is up in the front. But if you want a car with any form of legroom, especially one that's a little smaller like this one, well, this ain't gonna be your car, but that can be changed if you have a little bit of a shorter driver. This is where I would have the seat if I was driving this vehicle. And again, I'm 6'1", so taller folks back here, your knees are going to be right in either your driver or passenger's back, and I don't think they're going to appreciate that very much. But on the subject of other things, if you want to fold down those 60/40 seats that I was mentioning earlier, the triggers for which are on either side of the center part of the seat here, which in the center, you do have a small little armrest here with two decently sized cup holders here in the center as well. All right, everyone, so we are on the road now in the new Corolla Hybrid. Now, I do apologize first and foremost if you guys catch me yawning excessively during this short little drive that we have today, because I'm not gonna lie, as an enthusiast, this is not going to be sort of an exciting car to drive. It is meant for one thing, and that is getting some of the best fuel economy out there on the market. Now, of course, it's not a solid electric car, so you're not gonna be getting 100+ miles per gallon. But for what it is, like I said, this car is a rival for one of Toyota's very own, with a Prius rivaling 53 miles per gallon city and 52 miles per gallon on the highway. Now, I know at this point, most of you people are probably gonna say pics or it didn't happen, but during a trip to Galveston, which is about 50 or so miles away from our house here in the north end of Houston, we averaged around 61 21 miles per gallon. Now, if you do the math, if that sort of fuel economy were more constant, this car's tank of gas would last you between a week and a half and 2 straight weeks, which it didn't exactly last us that long, but at the very same time, knowing that that is a possibility is definitely something that will make most of your wallets a lot happier. Now, even though this car isn't rated for horsepower or speed or performance, let's just talk about what powers this thing, because it really is a rather generic setup, and like most hybrids, it consists of a few different things. You have a 1.8 liter 4-cylinder engine up front, mated to a CVT transmission in the middle, a front-wheel drive setup, 2 electric generators, and a sealed battery pack at the same time. All this added together, you're getting 121 total system horsepower, which in comparison to a gas Corolla is definitely not much, because something like a Corolla SE or XSE is definitely a more enthusiast and, dare I say, a little bit more of a sprightly member of the Corolla family. So aside from the power and performance and fuel economy figures, what has this car been like to live with over the past 2 weeks that Toyota has graciously lent us this car? Well, for one, I do have one small complaint. Aside from the fact that it is extremely fuel efficient and we've barely had to put any money into this car at all, the one complaint that I have is road noise. I was expecting this car to be a little bit more on the quiet side, but unfortunately, that's not been too much the case here. Now, I'm not even gonna try to give you guys an acceleration run in this car because it's just not worth it. If I were to put my foot down in this car, even with it in power mode, 0 to 60 in this thing comes up in what feels like 10 to 15 seconds. There is just no sense of speed in this car whatsoever. But at the end of it all, do you really think that a car like this is worth $24,000? Well, in my personal opinion, I would say that on one hand, yes, although you're spending a little bit more than, again, something like a Corolla L, LE, or even SE, you are still going to be saving a lot more in gas over your ownership of this vehicle, so therefore you would actually be saving more money in order to make the payments. But on the other hand, if you are somebody who prefers a little bit more of an engaging drive and something that's a lot more fun, whether on your daily commute or perhaps on a nice long trip, definitely one of the other members of the Corolla family would suit you just fine. Well, guys, that wraps up this review and drive of the 2020 Toyota Corolla Hybrid. If you like this video, please do give it a thumbs up, and also be sure to click that subscribe button down below for many more videos like this and more to come in the future. But in the end, once again, a huge thanks goes out to the folks at Gulf States Toyota, i.e. Toyota USA, for lending us this car for a solid 2 weeks, which I cannot be more appreciative of, and certainly my wallet is saying the same thing. But in the end, guys, I hope you enjoyed the review, and I will see y'all next time. Take care, everybody, and stay safe.